Hi everyone, Heather here with Astrolotta.com, and today I am here to talk to you about one of my favorite topics in astrology. I'm going to teach you a little bit about astrocartography and the relocated chart. And so this is the astrology of place. This is how you can sort of figure out what locations are best for you to live, to vacation in, to spend time in order to sort of align yourself with whatever changes in energy you actually prefer and that you would actually want to make things a little bit easier for you. Now, the relocated chart doesn't necessarily overpower the birth chart. It can, to a certain extent, if you live in a location for a very long period of time, then the relocated chart becomes more prominent, more important the more you sit in that energy. But really what it does is it sort of highlights different areas in your chart when you relocate to different places around the planet. And this is a topic that I am very interested in, especially because I have a tendency, I have Aquarius on my IC, and so I have a tendency to move across the country once every 2 to 3 years. And, you know, I've spent a lot of time in foreign countries and things like that as well. So I can attest to the fact that astrocartography and, you know, the relocated chart absolutely works. These methods that I'm going to teach to you today, they absolutely work. And so this is my own way of doing this. I'm not 100% sure how other astrologers go about doing relocation. I know that it's very similar, but this is sort of the way that I figured out how to do it for myself. And so I'm going to show you a little bit about what I do and how I do it and how you can sort of play around with this a little bit on your own in a very easy way. And if you do want to get a full relocation reading, I am now offering relocation readings on Astrolotta.com, and you can find the link for that in the description of this video below. And I'm doing those at a slightly discounted rate from my other readings because I love doing astrocartography, even though it is, you know, a little bit more legwork to get everything prepared for the readings. I find it to be really fun, and you know, I'm fascinated with this topic. So yeah, so if you want to book a reading with me, you can do that. And so the way that I go through and do astrocartography and I do relocation is, first, I look at the birth chart, right? So you need to look at the birth chart and you need to see what planets are aspected nicely and what planets are causing issues that are aspected poorly. And you need to also look at this in association with what your goals are, right? What do you want out of this move? What changes in energy are you trying to create by making this change in your life, by moving somewhere different, or, you know, by taking a vacation? What is your goal for this vacation, right? What do you want to get out of it? So taking that into account, I think, is important as well. But you really need to understand the birth chart first and the transits that are the aspects that are in your birth chart. And that, first and foremost, is the most important thing, because when you get into the astrocartography, which I'm going to show you an example of this in just a moment, and we're going to do a chart together after I explain what all the planetary lines mean. When you look at the astrocartography, you just see all the planets, right? You see the lines for each planet. And what the astrocartography does is it shows you in which locations your relocated chart would have different planets on the cardinal points in your birth chart, right? And so an example of that would be like if your moon, you know, is normally in the 9th house and you move to a place where you have the moon on your midheaven, right? And that would show up in the astrocartography as a line. It would be your moon midheaven line. And so that would be a place where it would be difficult to keep your private life private, you know, your emotions private. So your emotions would be more involved in your work. You'd be seen as more feminine and receptive out in the world and out in the work that you're doing. There's a lot of different things that would be associated with that, but it is also dependent on the aspects to the moon, right? So if you have your moon midheaven line going through a certain location, but your moon is very poorly aspected, it's like in a conjunction with like Mars and in square with Pluto and Uranus, and, you know, it's forming like a T-square and all that. It's just going to highlight the emotional difficulties that you already have to endure and experience on a day-to-day basis. And it's going to be very hard to keep other people out of your business and to sort of keep that under wraps, right? So you have to really understand what's going on in the birth chart as well. And one of the things I always do look at also is, you know, the Inconjunctions in the birth chart. And that is something that, you know, not many astrologers look at. And when they do, they don't look at it as intensely as I tend to, because I find that these are very important aspects in the birth chart. They can be the key to the chart and to understanding yourself and to understanding the astrocartography as well. Because if you ignore that, you're ignoring a big part of the astrology and a big part of the influence that's coming in through this relocation. And so if you want to learn about inconjunctions in your birth chart or how to interpret them in, anyone's chart, if you're a student of astrology, I do have a webinar that you can purchase that I did, a couple of months ago. The recording is available. Again, I'll put the description in below in the description of this video. I'll put the link. And so you can kind of see what that means, because we are going to be talking about inconjunctions a little bit in this video as well, because I've had a lot of clients that have moved to different places where like their Jupiter line is. And so Jupiter should be this beautiful, like glorious place to live, right? It's the great benefic. You should have good luck and good fortune and everything should flow really nicely. And it doesn't necessarily work that way if your Jupiter is not aspected well, especially in an inconjunction. For some people who have Jupiter inconjunctions, it can make you sort of like a doormat where you have trouble saying no to people, right? Because you want to impress people, you want to be generous, you can be overly generous with your time, money, energy, whatever it is, depending on the context in the chart. And so if you have a Jupiter line going through a place, you might think that that would be a really great place to go and to live or to visit. But you might find when you're there that even though it feels really good, there's something amiss, right? There's something amiss, and you have a difficult time saying no, and you take on too much burden, and you have a difficult time adhering to your commitments because you're saying yes to everything, right? And you can't do all of these things. You're saying yes to everything because you want to be generous with your time, you want to be generous with your energy, and because you care about people, like legitimately. But when people have Jupiter in an inconjunction, it indicates that they can have a difficulty saying no, and that causes them to sort of skirt their responsibilities or not do the things that they said that they were going to do, because they're overly ambitious when it comes to what they can accomplish, right? So that's just one of many, many different examples. And so without further ado, I'm going to show you the astrophotography map and how that works. I'm going to be using Patrick Swayze's chart just because I had that one handy. And when I was going through it, something really interesting happened. So I want to talk about that also. And when I was trying to figure out the best location for him. So obviously he's not here and around anymore, but we'll pretend he's my client. Maybe it's the ghost of Patrick Swayze or something like that, like in the movie Ghost, and I'm relocating him. So I'm going to share my screen so you can see what we're looking at here. And so the easiest way to do this for free is to go to astro.com, and you can go to, at the top, at astro.com, you'll see free horoscopes, and AstroClick Travel will come up. Click AstroClick Travel, and of course you have to enter your birth information first. So make sure that you go in, you create your birth chart first. You add your date, time, location of birth, and you can do that where it says natal chart ascendant before you go to AstroClick Travel, and then go to AstroClick Travel, and then make sure that the horoscope is for your name. And then out of all of these different locations here, click Scalable Google Map, because that's the best and the easiest one to look at, because you can zoom in and out. You can get really close into specific cities and specific locations, and you can look at the whole world all at once. Whereas these other places, it's not as user-friendly, the interface, and how you can sort of figure out where things are. And so once you do that, and once you get to your Scalable Google Map in the AstroClick Travel in astro.com, you will get a map like this, right? And this is Patrick Swayze's map. And so you'll see all of these different lines all over the place. Crazy, right? So when you see DC, that means descendant, which is the opposite of the ascendant. It has to do with relationships. And especially marriage partnerships, all long-term partnerships, all committed relationships and contracts are associated with the descendant. AC would, of course, be ascendant, so that would be your rising. So it more has to do with your persona and the energy that you project out into the world. And then you'll see IC, which, of course, is at the very base of the chart. This represents the home and the family. And then you'll see MC with some of these as well. And so the MC stands for Midheaven. And so the Midheaven represents your career and your public reputation. And taken together, these 4 points make up the cardinal points in your chart, which essentially form the structure or the backbone of your entire chart. And it sets the house system, especially if you use Placidus like I do. And so these are really important parts of the chart. And when you have a planet there on any of these 4 points, it becomes more important and more prominent. And so the energy becomes stronger in a different way, in a different context, depending on which point you have the conjunction with, right? And so I'm just going to go through what the different planets mean as well before we sort of get into this, because you'll see here that there are all these different lines going through all these different places, right? And so you can click on the lines and it'll give you sort of a very basic description of what that means. Don't go by this description alone because it's not going to be very accurate, because it's not accounting for the aspects in your birth chart and the context of like what houses all the things are being relocated in, because it's not just that, you know, Chiron is moving to your IC when you go to Detroit, Michigan, right? It's also that all of your planets are being relocated to a different house, to a different placement, to a different position in your chart, and you need to account for all of that. And so, you know, you can click around and see different places. And so in general, I'm going to tell you what the different planetary lines mean. And then I'm going to go into Patrick Swayze's chart and show you how to find the best place to live or go on a vacation, or find a place that's associated with the energy that you want to sort of enhance, right? And so usually you want to enhance some really positive energy, but maybe you're going on a vacation or you're spending, you know, 6 weeks or something somewhere, and it's for a very specific purpose. And in that case, you want to make sure that you're highlighting the energy that you want to bring in, right? And so, and it's for some people too, they'll have a place where it's like really nice aspects, but they don't work well with that. And you can usually tell by their chart. Some people need a certain amount of intensity and challenge, otherwise they get bored. And so it really depends on the person. You have to look at their whole chart, and you have to look at the aspects to the planets. But in general, I'm going to explain to you what these different sort of planets, you know, associated with these different areas would mean. And so when you move to a different location, the energy of your birth chart shifts, right? And so I'm just going to really quickly show you Patrick Swayze's chart, because this is his birth chart, right? In Houston, Texas, where he was born. And so you can see here that, you know, he has a stellium going on in the 11th house with the sun, the south node, Pluto, Mercury in retrograde. He's also got Lilith there. He's got trans Pluto there. And then he also has the moon, right? So he's got a lot of Leo. And you can see that in him, right? He seems like a very Leo kind of guy. And he has his Venus hidden away in the 12th house. And so for him, when I look at his chart, I see that he's got a lot of complicated aspects going on here, especially with his sun, right? His sun is not his strong planet when it comes to the aspects, right? It's pretty afflicted, as we would call it in astrology. There's a major T-square going on with this stellium here with Jupiter and Mars as well. So, you know, the sun line, even though for most people the sun line would be really beneficial if you have a really nicely aspected sun, especially because it creates success, you know, and it helps you to come into your own, to find your soul's purpose, your soul's path in this reality. For him, it would be a little bit difficult to have a sun line going through somewhere. You can also see that Venus here, this is a planet, I like his Venus, and I also like his moon, even though it's part of this stellium. It's not my favorite. I like his Venus the most because it's completely unaspected except for this really beautiful trine. It's a wide trine, but it's still a trine with Jupiter. And so, you know, his Venus is his nicest planet in terms of aspects, and then Venus is usually considered to be a benefic planet. It brings harmony, beauty, pleasure, relationships, sensuality, all sorts of wonderful things, right? Venus is usually a really nice planetary energy, as long as it's aspected nicely. So when you have your Venus lines going through a certain location, in general, that can make relationships better. It can help you to become, especially on your ascendant or your midheaven, you'd be more charismatic, more likable, more lovable. It would increase your self-esteem and self-worth. It would help you to make more money, right? To engage in indulging in physical pleasures a little bit more so. And in general, it makes you more creative, more receptive. And so it can be a very nice energy for a lot of different reasons. And so you can see that his Venus is nicely aspected. So that would be a nice planet to look at, right? And then when we move to his chart for Las Vegas, and I'll tell you how it came to this Las Vegas chart and all of that, and then how it all came about toward, like, after I get into all the planets. But Venus is on his ascendant here, right? And so when Venus is on his ascendant, that moves Venus on his ascendant, which is great. But you also have to take into consideration the fact that this stellium here, that's normally in his 11th house. So normally there's a lot of focus and energy around his friends, his social networks, the groups of people that he spends time with, even though his sun is right on the cusp between the 11th and 12th. So there is sort of a need for solitude and to go inward and for privacy and all of that as well. You know, a lot of this energy, there's a lot of energy around friends and networking, right? And the people that you spend your time with. Whereas here, it's more secluded, more in solitude, right? His focus is more on going inward, which might actually be nice for him, actually, considering the way that his chart is set up. You know, he probably likes a certain amount of privacy and solitude, even though he does like the attention with all this Leo, right? There's a part of him that keeps a lot of things private, and he's not someone who is like all in the tabloids that often or anything like that. He would be out in the public eye. He would, you know, share himself a little bit with the world, but for the most part, there wasn't a lot going on there. In terms of like, you know, his private life being out in the public eye. So anyway, but you can also see that his Jupiter, right, is in that Inconjunction. So his Jupiter line, and it's not very nicely aspected. There is a sextile to Uranus, but for the most part, his Jupiter is like part of this T-square. It's squaring, you know, Mercury and Pluto and his south node and his sun, and it's also in opposition to Mars. So, and it's in this inconjunction with Neptune, which is actually the same inconjunction that I have. And so if he moved to a place where his Jupiter line ran through, so let's say the Jupiter midheaven line, so he moves to like, you know, British Columbia on the coast right here, if you can see. This is where his Jupiter line would come through, his Jupiter midheaven line. That's just going to be highlighting his boundary issues, and it's going to make it harder for him to say no to people, especially when it comes to career, right? Because that's the midheaven, and it's going to make it a little bit more. It's just going to make things difficult for him in a lot of different ways. It's going to seem really nice. He's going to be very optimistic in terms of his outlook, but he's going to be a little too ambitious with what he can do and what he can accomplish, and yeah, so that can cause some issues, right? And I actually lived in a place where I had my Sun and Jupiter lines crossing for a number of years, and my Sun is very nicely aspected, so that was really great for me. You know, and my Sun is in the 11th house, and it's still in the 11th house there, and so I had a lot of. Well, my Sun is in the 10th house, and it was in the 11th house there. It was moved to the 11th house. And so I had a lot of really great friends, a lot of really solid relationships that came in, you know, a really good social circle, a really good community, and a really good network of friends. And, you know, and I really enjoyed the energy there. I loved being there. But after leaving, I looked back on it and I realized that I had some really major boundary issues that came up, and a lot of it had to do with my inability to say no to the friends that I loved so dearly and that I cared so much about. I wanted to be able to do everything to help them all the time, to the point where I was overextending myself and I couldn't actually live up to all those commitments, right? Because I have that Jupiter in conjunction in my birth chart, and that was highlighted very prominently where I was living at that point in time. And so these are just, you know, examples of different things that can come up. And so I'm going to just go through the different planetary energies and you know, what they mean and what they are. And then we'll get back into Patrick Swayze's chart, because I tried to find the perfect place for him. And it was very interesting because I chose his Venus line because as I mentioned before, Venus is a benefic planet, and it's very nicely aspected in his birth chart. And so I chose Las Vegas, Nevada, right? Because that puts Venus right on his ascendant. So you look at this right here. I'm kind of excited about this because it's very interesting. So in Las Vegas, it's just, you know, a little bit east of that exact Venus ascendant line. So that Venus ascendant energy is very, very prominent. If you're not sure what line is going through there, you click on the area. And sometimes the areas, like you'll click on a random area and there will be lines crossing there even if you don't see it. So that planetary energy will still be prominent, but it's not going to be right on the ascendant or right on the midheaven in the relocated chart. So it's not as strong as where the lines go right through, but it's still there and that energy is still there. But so I chose Las Vegas, Nevada because Venus on the ascendant, you know, right there. And so, and then because of the way that his chart was relocated very nicely, a lot of really nice things, which we'll get into. And I come to find out when I was doing research for this that he actually had a ranch where he lived just outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. And so he either had a really great astrologer or he was, right on point. Like he liked that area, right? He gravitated to that area because of the really beautiful energy that it created for him. It created more balance, more harmony, a greater connection with his wife. It would have just been a very nice, pleasant, pleasurable experience to be in that energy for him. And so he either intuitively knew, I'm assuming that's probably what it was, but maybe he had a good astrologer or something and they picked his astrophotography. But that's what I chose for him. And then I went and I looked it up, and he actually lived there, which is so strange. I wasn't expecting that. But anyway, so I'm going to get into the lines. I'm a little off topic, but hopefully you're finding this a little bit helpful. For those of you that are planning a big move or who are, thinking about taking a really long vacation or a really important vacation where you're going to be spending a lot of money to go to a certain place, it's important to know what the energy is like. Because if you're lining yourself up with like some weird sort of astrology, then your experience isn't going to be what you necessarily want it to be sometimes. Okay, so I'm going to go through just in order by like sun, moon, all of that. So the sun line is going to be associated with success, with worldly pursuits. The sun in general in the birth chart represents sort of the soul's expression the soul's expression of purpose in the physical reality. And so you can connect more deeply with your role in life, with your path in life, with your purpose in life. And usually a sun place, especially if your sun is nicely aspected, it's going to feel very good. And you're going to be recognized, and you're going to be more successful. You're going to be more vibrant, more energetic. It's going to increase your vitality, right? Because the sun represents our vitality, our life force energy. And so that increases when we live on a place where our sun line crosses. And then, so for Patrick Swayze, he has the sun ascendant line crossing through the middle of Alaska, right? Not that he would live there, but just as an example, this would be a place where he would experience, for him in particular, it wouldn't be as nice, but let's just pretend his sun is nicely aspected. Then he would experience like more success. He'd feel better. He'd be more vital. He'd be more vibrant, more likable, more energetic, more charismatic. That Leo sun would come out a lot more, and he'd be recognized for his talents, for his gifts, for sort of creating out in the world, acting on his passions. And so that would be, an example of the sun. On the ascendant, or in any of the points where it's more prominent, right? I'm going to use the ascendant as an example because I'm not going to go through all 4 points in the chart. But if you look at it in the context of the ascendant, that's what it would bring. Midheaven, kind of similar, would be career success, right? It would be more recognition for your career. I see, the focal point would be more on the home and family. You'd be a little bit more family oriented and more hidden away from the world. It wouldn't be like success out in the world where everybody's recognizing you, but it would be a nice energy for your home and your family situation. It could be a little difficult though, having the sun there. For a variety of reasons, because the sun likes to be out and about a little bit more. But yeah, and then if you had it on the descendant line, right, that would highlight your relationships, and it would make you would find your identity, you'd find yourself through really powerful, really prominent relationships with people that you can feel proud of and people who feel proud of you, right? So it increases your feeling of being successful out in the world when you have the sun on, or it's successful in relationships, but it's successful in general, right, through your relationships with the sun on the descendant. Okay, and so the moon line is where you would want to go if you want to increase feelings of safety, security, connecting with your emotions, starting a family, connecting with your family, connecting with your roots, feeling more loving, compassionate, intuitive. Those types of energies can be associated with the moon line. And again, you have to look at what sign it's in, where it is in your chart. But in general, this is a really emotional place, and it's going to feel like home. You're going to feel more supported. It's going to feel internally like you're in a place that's safe and that's secure, right? And so, the moon line, that's what that would do for you. So if you're thinking about, laying down roots, or if you want to place, also you can connect with your creativity more so on the moon line. Moon on the midheaven, like I mentioned before, it's hard to keep your private life private when you have that, because your emotions are right up there. For everyone to see. And moon on the ascendant too, you'll be wearing your heart on your sleeve. You'll be wearing your emotions on your sleeve. It'll be hard to keep things from people. You'll be more expressive with your emotions there. And then, so, it's just dependent on what you want to, highlight, right? And if your moon is a nice moon, if it's nicely aspected, then that could be great for you, especially if that's what you're going for, is connecting with your emotions, feeling more safe and more supported and secure in those different ways. And so that could be a really nice energy. And then so after that you have, and let's talk about the moon's nodes before we go on to the other planetary energies, because those you can find here on the astrocartography chart. And so you see the moon's nodes right here. We have the lunar node descendant lines coming through Alaska again for Patrick Swayze. Let me find a different location for him with that. So in like Greenland, Africa, there's not really a good example where he would maybe like live. But, oh, maybe someplace in Asia. Anyway, so his moon descendant, or his descendant lines, sorry, the lunar node lines, what they do is they bring very fated, very karmic occurrences. They can make things very intense. It's kind of like living in an eclipse. So it's not a place to dwell or to stay in, but sometimes you need to go to those places, and sometimes you're drawn to those places because you're on the wrong path, right? So a lot of times when you're drawn to a lunar node location and you end up living there, it's because you need to be thrown and thrust into a completely new path, a completely new direction that's more in alignment with what you came here to do. And you'll have a lot of very strange, fated, synchronous occurrences. It's just a very bizarre energy to live in. And I lived in a lunar node place for about 8 months, and that was plenty of time. My entire life changed because of it. And, you know, that's just what I needed at that point in my life. And I'm really glad that it happened, but I would never, ever stay there, right? Because that energy is constantly just, it's so bizarre and it's so intense and it's very synchronous, and it can be so wonderful. And you can connect with very fated, sort of beautiful relationships where you were meant to meet up with these people for a certain purpose. In your lifetime, and it's like fate steps in when you're in a lunar node place. And that can also be a really great place to even take a vacation, right? If you feel like you're on the wrong path and you need to sort of realign yourself with your destiny, a lunar node place could be good for that. But it's not going to be like it could be an interesting vacation, but it's not going to be like a laying on the beach just like chilling sort of thing. It's for a specific purpose, right? You need to get realigned. And then so if you go into Mercury, your Mercury lines, that is a place where you're going to be very busy and there's going to be a lot of communication, right? Mercury rules communication, intelligence. It rules your thought processes and your day-to-day experience, your day-to-day travel, your day-to-day communications. And so, you know, when you live in a Mercury place where your Mercury line crosses, you're going to be very, very busy. You're going to be very busy. A lot of communication, constant like bombardment with like texts, emails, phone calls, talking to people here and there. Your mind will be a lot busier as well. And so, you know, that can be a really good place if that's what you want to enhance, right? If you want to enhance your intelligence, if you want really good communication, if you want to sort of highlight your communication, that can be a good place to be. And so, you know, I live in a Mercury place right now where my Mercury-Mars lines cross on my ascendant and descendant. And it's and because it's Mercury-Mars, right, I have Mercury-Mars in opposition in my birth chart, it's very busy all the time. A lot of communication. It's like constant, like I'm always talking with clients. I'm on YouTube, you know, I'm on, you know, constantly emailing, you know, with clients and different people, constant text messages, phone calls from my friends and family members. It's like nonstop. And I mean, I love that because I love, you know, connecting with all these people, but it is very busy, right? It's a very busy place. So you got to sort of understand that if you're moving to a Mercury place, and if your Mercury is nicely aspected, it's going to be perceived more positively because Mercury is kind of neutral, right? It's not like fully benefic and it's not malefic. So it kind of depends on the energy in your chart. And my Mercury is a little bit more difficult, but it's still okay, you know, the energy here. And some people, you know, have a really nice Mercury, and their Mercury line being on, their Mercury being on their ascendant would actually be very, very beneficial for them, especially, you know, if they're involved in certain work that involves communication, intelligence, they're going to a certain place to study something, to learn a new skill, you know, those types of things. So Mercury line can be good and bad. It just depends on the context. And then Mars line. And like I just mentioned, I do have my Mars line through here. So this is a good place to go if you want to strengthen your willpower. You know, personally speaking, I do have a debilitated Mars. And I'm sorry I'm talking so much about my chart. I normally don't do that and I don't like to do it. But I've just lived in so many places and had so many experiences with these different, you know, planetary energies. So it's helpful to have an example, right? And so with your Mars line going through a different, like any certain place, you're going to be much more active. It's going to strengthen your willpower, but you can be more prone to frustration, to anger, to accidents, to jumping into things too quickly. It's a great energy to initiate something for a fresh start, right? But it can be a difficult energy, and especially if your Mars is aspected difficult, in a way that's difficult, right? If your Mars is really nicely aspected, it can be really good, especially if you're looking to become more active, to become more willful, to become more strong, physically, mentally, all of that, right? But, you know, it can also be a difficult line. So it just depends on, again, what it is that you're going for and what's going on in your chart. So we did Mars, Mercury, Venus. We didn't do Venus. So Venus, we did talk about, that's like relationships. You know, it enhances pleasure. It makes things much more beautiful. It makes you more charismatic, more likable. Your appearance might improve. You know, if you have a nicely aspected Venus, your relationships can improve. It's really good for working one-on-one if you're someone who works one-on-one with clients, or if you just want to, you know, improve your relationships overall, a Venus line is a good place to go. And that's a really sort of indulgent place where you can, you know, indulge in things that give you pleasure, that make you feel good. And that can also be a good place for money, depending on what your Venus is doing in the birth chart as well. But again, you have to look at where all the other planets are relocating. Just because your Venus ascendant line is going through someplace doesn't mean you're going to make more money there. Let's say your Venus is relocated to your ascendant or to your midheaven, but in that relocated chart, Saturn is in your second house, right? Then that means that you're going to have to work much harder for your money, but you'll be more likable, right? So it just depends. So we did Venus, Jupiter. So your Jupiter line, that can be a very beneficial place where you have really good fortune. Again, you can be more charismatic, more likable. The focus is more on your beliefs, on adventure, on expanding your horizons through experience. But it can be a very beautiful and beneficial place to live where, you know, a lot of really great energy can a lot of really good fortune can come from living in a Jupiter place. And again, it depends on where it lands in your birth chart. So if it's on the midheaven, then that could be really good for expanding on your career, right? What do you want to expand on? On the ascendant, it's like really good for you. You'll be more likable, more charismatic, kind of like a Venus line, but more like you'll be more optimistic, more open, more expansive, more excited. You know, that type of energy. You know, Jupiter on the descendant can bring really great relationships. On the IC, it expands on your home, your family, your comfort, your property. And, you know, Jupiter lines are another place where you can get more money and more wealth. But you have to really look at what's going on in the chart. I lived in a place where I had a Jupiter line going through there, which I mentioned before. My Jupiter is in an Inconjunction, so it's not nicely aspected per se. And even though my Jupiter line was going through there, it wasn't on one of the cardinal points, which can happen, you know, when you do the astrophotography. And so it relocated my Jupiter in the 8th house. And so can you guess what, what it expanded on? It expanded on debt, right? So I went into more debt being in that location because it was really expensive to live there. And so, you know, that was sort of the negative side of having Jupiter there, because it relocated it to my 8th house and it made it more prominent having the line going through there. So that's, again, just another example. So you really need to be aware of what's going on in your birth chart. And if you need help with that, of course, you can always contact me. As I mentioned before, I am doing relocation readings through Astrolada's website, so you can find that in the link below. So now we're getting into Saturn. Saturn lines are where you're going to have to work really hard. Saturn lines increase work. And it depends, again, on the context and what's going to be more work. You really don't, even if your Saturn is nicely aspected, unless you really want to like increase your sense of self-responsibility, if you want to like really do the hard work, if you want to like be really immersed in the physical, the tangible, the practical, and you have a nicely aspected Saturn, you know, maybe that's a place to go for a certain amount of time. But Saturn is going to increase feelings of limitation, restriction, burden. It's going to make you feel a little bit heavier. Things are going to move more slowly. You're going to have to work harder at everything that you do. And so when you have Saturn on the ascendant, you know, it's a lot of personal burden and responsibility you're going to feel in that place. And it's going to be harder for you to leave a Saturn ascendant place or a Saturn place in general, right? You're going to stay there longer than you might want to. But if you want to find a permanent location where it's very stable, very grounded, a Saturn place is a good place to go. And if you're sick of moving around and you want to stay put, Saturn, can bring that as well. Saturn on the IC, similar thing, difficult, very challenging situations when it comes to the home, family, all of that. You can feel a lot of burden of responsibility related to your home environment, your family environment. And, midheaven with Saturn there, it's going to make a lot of work when it comes to your career. And when it comes to the descendant, it can limit and restrict your relationships. Your relationships can feel much more like work. And so you have to kind of be aware of that. But it could also bring a long-term commitment and a long-term relationship, Saturn on the descendant. So if that's something that you're looking for. So it just depends. And then Uranus, it's going to increase your need for freedom and, independence and doing things that are really exciting. And this can be good and bad, right? Because if you don't act on that energy, if you're not really ready to kind of change it up all the time and constantly keep yourself on your toes and to be exploring new things, new exciting, like different topics and, just constantly being excited, constantly innovating, constantly coming up with new ideas, constantly doing new things that are exciting and different. If you're not doing that and you're not engaging with that energy, a Uranus place can be very frustrating because Uranus is one of these planets where if you don't change the energy yourself, if you don't act on it, if you don't create the change, Uranus will come and it'll create the change for you. Some sort of outside external circumstance will make the changes that you actually should be making yourself. And it'll be a little bit more disruptive and difficult when that occurs as opposed to you acting on the energy. And so with Uranus going through a certain area, you need to constantly be doing things that are exciting. My husband, where we live right now, has his Uranus line coming through where we live. And, he's doing a lot of different things, right? He's constantly taking different courses. He's doing like wilderness medicine and, rope rescue and all these really Uranus sort of exciting things and constantly changing it up, constantly doing new things. And so, this is good because it kind of got him out of feeling kind of stagnant and stuck before. And so it can be, if you want to shake things up, right? It might not be a place where you're going to stay forever when you have your Uranus line going through there because there is going to be a constant craving for change, for innovation, for newness. And so after a while, you might decide to just up and move because you need to change something really, and you're kind of sick of the frustrated, unsettled energy. You want to kind of chill for a little bit, right? But, if you're someone that likes the Uranian energy, that could be a really good place for you. And then Neptune. Neptune is another interesting one. I have also lived in a Neptune place. Neptune is interesting because things are not always what you think that they are when you're in a Neptune place. It can be a good place for escape, for retreats, for creativity, for creative pursuits, for going inward. But, things are not what they seem in a Neptune place. So you can see things through the lens of rose-colored glasses much more easily, especially when it comes to your living environments, into your surroundings and like the location that you're in and, all of that kind of stuff. So you're seeing things through the lens of these rose-colored glasses where you're not able to see things clearly because you have this idealistic viewpoint of whatever it is that you're engaging with. And again, that could be dependent on where Neptune is. Like for Patrick Swayze here, if he's in Nova Scotia, he has his Neptune ascendant line going there. That could be really great for him because he's an actor, right? Neptune on the ascendant is great for, actors. I've noticed that some of the best actors have like a prominent Neptune because they can really immerse themselves in the role that they're playing to the point where it becomes them, right? Their personal lives are usually kind of a mess, but they're really good actors because they can really, really fully immerse themselves into that role that they're playing. And that would be a really good usage of a Neptune line, right? If you were an actor or if you were involved in some sort of creative work, if you wrote like screenplays or novels or something where it's more fantasy related, those types of things could be really good for a Neptune line. But it's going to make it hard for you to see things clearly and to be discerning. You're going to be kind of floating around in la la land a little bit more so than you normally would. So that's just something. And you won't see that you won't necessarily see that things aren't what they appear to be until you're outside of that place, right? You look back on it, or you like leave and go on vacation, you're like, wow, like this is a mess. But when you're in it, it feels good and it feels nice. It's kind of like an escape. But it can also cause you to sort of make a mess of things because you can't see things clearly. So that's just something to be aware of with the Neptune line. And the more you stay in that energy, the more it takes over. And then Pluto, finally. Pluto lines, you know, are going to be very, very intense. They deal with death, sex, intensity, transformation, things that are secretive, taboo, dark, mysterious. And so I really do like Pluto in the birth chart. When it's in a nice aspect with another planet, it's one of my favorite aspects in the birth chart. Like Pluto, you know, trining something. It's a very deeply restorative, deeply transformative, deeply regenerative aspect. And it usually, like Pluto, you know, in trine with the moon, you would have a very sharp intuition. It can bring psychic abilities. You can really read and see through people in a way that is not overpowering, not abrasive, not intense in a negative sort of way where it feels like a crisis always, or you're dealing with a lot of dark energy. It's more restorative, regenerative when it's in a trine. But anyway, even though, you know, I do like Pluto, you know, some people are afraid of it. I do like Pluto, but it can bring a lot of intensity. So if you live in a place where your Pluto lines are going through, it's going to feel very intense all of the time. And it can feel very dark. And some people do really well with that energy. I have a very close friend who she always gravitates toward living where her Pluto lines go through. And she likes it. She really enjoys being in that energy. She thrives on the intensity, and she works with sort of the more taboo topics, you know, like sexuality and, you know, the occult and all these things. So she works with that energy very, very well. But not everybody, and most people actually, are not going to work with that energy well. And, you know, my teacher, Robert Phoenix, who I'm going to be doing another interview with here in just a couple of weeks about Chiron and Aries, so look out for that. He actually told me a story, and he brought it up a couple of days ago on his podcast again, about how he had Pluto. I think it was going through, his Pluto line was going through London, I believe it was. It might be a different place, but I think it was London. And he was very literally, when he was there dealing with death, like he accidentally walked in on somebody's funeral, and then it was like he was there so he couldn't really leave kind of thing. So it was like very, very literal, and sometimes it will be. So you can show up in these places and you might be dealing with death, but not your own death. You're just kind of like, you know, there along for the ride, or you're dealing with intensity, you're dealing with topics that are darker, that are more taboo. It can just feel like sort of a dark energy or a difficult energy, or it can bring about crisis situations, especially if your Pluto's not nicely aspected. So, you know, for the most part, I wouldn't want to highlight someone's Pluto unless that's what they want, and it's like more of a vacation, right? Some people though, like my friend that I mentioned, she thrives in the Pluto energy. So again, it really depends on the people, what their charts are, what they're interested in, what they're going for with the energy. And so anyway, so that's just part of it, right? Looking at these lines. So go, you know, play with this for yourself. And then you really, again, need to figure out what's going on in the relocated chart. The relocated chart just relocates your birth chart to that place where you are moving to. And it does become very prominent, and it is important energy to look at. Some people ask me about looking at the relocated ascendant and transits to it. There's a different context to this, and it is, I have noticed that it becomes more important, the energy of the places. So if you have, like, let's say your Mercury ascendant line going through a certain place, you'll notice that transits to Mercury are going to be much more prominent than they normally would be, and they're going to impact you a lot more. And transits from Mercury will impact you a lot more. So that planetary energy will be more important, but you have to look at it in the context of your surroundings and your environment instead of your personal life, right? So it does kind of change it up a little bit, which we can get into that. Maybe I'll do a course on this or something, because there's so much, and I'm kind of already going a little bit long here. There's so much that you can look at with this. It's crazy. So I'm going to leave you with the astrophotography for right now, and maybe we'll do a part 2 to this, and we'll really get into the relocated charts, because that is interesting and it is important. You want to figure out where the planets should be, or where you would want them to be to create the energy that you want to create. Everybody has difficult aspects in their chart, and usually people have something that's, you know, nicely aspected that's a little bit easier. And so really the end goal is to highlight your strengths through the relocated chart, and to make the challenges a little bit less challenging by placement. And so an example of this would be Saturn, right? Most people have sort of a they don't like Saturn because it causes limitation, restriction, responsibility. I kind of like Saturn now that I've gone through my Saturn return. I don't know. I feel like I understand Saturn a lot more, and it makes sense. And, there's a lot of gifts that come from dealing with Saturn. But in general, like say you have a Saturn that is very difficult. It's like very afflicted. And, this has been a problem for you throughout your life or something along those lines. I'm going to stop sharing this because I don't really need to share this right now. But say you have, a difficult Saturn. And so one of the ways that you could deal with that and make your Saturn a little bit easier, like let's pretend you have Saturn, Pluto conjunction squaring Mars or something. Putting your Saturn in like the 3rd house or the 6th house would actually be helpful, because I have noticed in working with clients that Saturn actually does much better in the 3rd house and the 6th house. I'm not 100% sure why, but I've just, those areas work really well. So, relocating your Saturn to one of those houses would make those challenges a little bit easier, and you'd be able to deal with it a lot better. In the 3rd house, you'd be able to understand what's going on and make plans and like work with the energy, right? Because 3rd house is a lot of work and the 6th house is a lot of work and Saturn is a lot of work. So I think that's kind of why they kind of do well in those areas. And also, if you want to like work harder on something specific, right? Like you need to put in a lot of hard work when it comes to your career. And you need to start working a little bit harder in that area. You need to get yourself together, get more grounded, get more sort of set a solid foundation for yourself in terms of your career. Then you would want to put Saturn in one of the Earth houses, right? Probably not the 2nd house, because that makes money a little hard and most people don't like that. But the 6th or the 10th would be a good place for that, for a specific purpose, for a specific duration of time, right? Okay, so I just went through a lot of different information. I hope that this was helpful to you in some sort of way. And again, if you want to book a reading with me, I love doing relocation. We can look at multiple locations, at any given point in time. I always look at it in comparison to the birth chart and the current location where you're living. And I also look at the transits that are related to either the move that you're going to be making or the vacation and the timing of that as well. So I make this a very holistic reading. It's not just, oh, this is a good place, the end. It's like I go really deep into it and why, and also the transits and all of that. And if you don't know the place that you want to live and you want to just know what the best places are for you, you can always book a relocation reading, and I will find you, just like I did for Patrick Swayze, because he already knew, I'll find you the best place that I can see for you, where you could relocate, where you could do better with the energy. So anyway, I hope that was helpful, and thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again next week. All right, bye.